Welcome everyone to our third edition of the Support Local Art Talk series supported by Nations Trust Bank Private Banking. In this conversation, we will discuss the role of collector. And in curating this panel, my aim was to present not only different profiles, but also different styles of collecting. And I've had the privilege of working with the collectors who sit with us on this panel today, and the pleasure of learning more and of their particular style in collecting, but also gaining an interesting knowledge into their private world of collecting. Before we begin, I would like to introduce the panel. We have with us today Chamika De Alwis, the principal architect of CDA Associates and trustee of the Jeffrey Baba Trust and Lulu Galba Trust. Niloo Jayatilake, head of investments of SoftLogix Holding PLC and chief executive of the Unit Trust Fund. Lahiru Pathmalal, director of e-commerce Kuma and former board member of People's Bank Private PLC. Samaadhi Weerasinghe, director of Oryx Benedal Limited and founder of clothing brand Anuk. Chamika, I would like to start the conversation with you. You have a very distinct eye for collecting and for contemporary art. When did you begin collecting, and how did your taste and preference of art develop?
Well, in fact, Saskia, it started by not collecting per se, because it started by, I was fortunate enough to be around fantastic collections and collectors. Collectors like Anjalendran, Channa, Murad, since around 2003. And it was always to do with being around these beautiful things and understanding and appreciating them. Until one fine day, Anjalendran gifted me two very beautiful Kingsley Gunathilaka line drawings to say, here, start a collection. And from that point onwards, in fact, it was because I had no intention of collecting to start with, because one is I couldn't afford it at that time. I was just a student and working, being a student. And it was purely to do with how one actually perceived and being around these fantastic things. And then from that point onwards, obviously the start is from those two paintings. And I kind of took on collecting from around 2008, 2009.
You spoke about how at that time, at the beginning of collecting, via the architects that you were working with, you also were introduced to many artists, and via their collections were exposed to the world of collecting, the world of art in Sri Lanka at that time. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I think the key is that for me, it was to do with, once again, when I started collecting, it was to do with the references that I had already seen. So when I started collecting, it was to do with, yes, I've seen this beautiful piece. And when I actually found something of the same artist, it was all to do with that kind of layering. But then obviously, I mean, maturity struck. And then obviously I was looking into and seeing and meeting these fantastic artists. And then the storyline actually changes, where you actually know the meaning behind these pieces. It's not only for the face of the piece of art, but also, in fact, what this art is about, the emotions of the artist. And for me, what was more important was the time and what symbolized that kind of piece. And for me, if you look at my collection, I could immediately say I bought this piece at this particular time, which symbolizes also what was going around in Sri Lanka. And once again, I think we were fortunate to be around the 90s movement at that point. And being and getting to know people like Jagat Weerasinghe, Pala Potupitiya, Sanadanan, Mohanad, and even people like Shamini with her curations and her publications. And being around all of that, in fact, kind of gave me a different direction and to kind of appreciate concept art and looking at that in that form. And I think the key is also knowing what is out there, also helped me to kind of evolve from only looking at possibly the beauty in art, which is obviously very, very important. But sometimes, as Jagat says, ugliness is also beautiful. And you have that, what you call the extreme ends of it. And I think traveling, thanks to my profession, I fortunate to get the opportunity of traveling quite a bit. And being outside Sri Lanka gives me also kind of an insight as to what's happening around the world, and which is quite important in art. By meeting fantastic people, curators, collectors, artists, visiting biennales, galleries, all of that, that gives you a kind of a insight for me personally to appreciate also contemporary art, which is happening now, currently in Sri Lanka. Gives you that, otherwise what happens is you only kind of know and you see what's happening in your immediate context. And seeing, I think, what's around the world at that particular time and that moment is pretty important. It was pretty important to me. And that was one way to answer your question, how the eye has developed and the collections have evolved is through that process. And I think it's pretty important to do that.
And your collection is clearly a combination of contemporary and modern, and we can see that from the works that are placed behind you as well. So was it the modern that came later?
Yes, in fact, it's a funny story where the first piece of art I actually bought was, it sounds as ridiculous as it kind of might be, it was an Ivan Peiris. Once again, simply because of Anjalendra, typical Anjalendran style, come, bye. And he had introduced me to Senaka Bandaranayake at that point. And Anjalan had said, look, you should buy this. And to be quite honest, I really couldn't afford it. And I knew I couldn't. And I said, sir, look, I really can't afford this piece. He said, no, I've already spoken to Senaka. And he's decided to give you a student discount. And another 6 months or 6 installments in paying back. And so that was the start of actually buying and getting into the masters. And by doing that, in fact, it gave me a kind of a much more of an insight as to what contemporary art is, because those pieces were contemporary art. If you look at it, I mean, that's the reason I kind of appreciate a lot of Ivan Peiris' work, is that it is very, very contemporary, even in the current context. And that gave me an edge to kind of developing an eye for the current young artists of contemporary Sri Lankan art. And then, as I mentioned, it's to do with that balance. And for me as an architect, also being a person who collects and lives amongst art, it's pretty important as to how things have been placed. I think placement for art for me is pretty important in terms of where it sits, what it does to the space, and having a kind of a master's painting next to something which is very current does also justice to each other in a way. So that's also part of the collection which I kind of try to develop. And also when I do keep art or do place it in certain places, is to do with what complements the other. And even if I buy into art, it's mostly also to do with possibly placement. What would happen if this piece is bought? Where will I actually keep it? And what will it do to the collection? And obviously there's a one-off piece, you just buy it because it's absolutely beautiful and you can't let go of it. So those are the kind of different, I think, steps that I've taken so far in having a collection.
Thanks, Chamika. It's really interesting to understand how this journey of collecting began. But also for younger collectors here, people who are interested in starting a collection to sort of get an idea of how now you have a combination of modern and contemporary, but at the very beginning, it was also about being realistic with how you could approach, but understanding that you wanted a work of value, but being realistic with how you would be able to invest in that. And I think that's something incredibly interesting for younger collectors. It's not just about finding an affordable piece, it's about finding something of value. And then there are so many ways we can approach collecting nowadays in terms of investing in installments, etc. So thank you for sharing that. Speaking of investing, Niloo, I'd like to come over to you. We've had so many conversations based on investing in art and the growth of the art industry. And via your role, of course, more in finance. How did your interest in art begin before, this more kind of, I would say, what is today also much more matured relationship with art, which is very much related to this whole notion of investing in art? How did all of that begin?
Saskia, it goes back a long time when I was a teenager, where I grew up in a family where art was there freely, because I had a uncle who was called Gamunu. He was an architect and he was also an artist, right? So we had like lots of paintings in our grandmother's house, in our house, all that, but a lot of his art was never appreciated by the family. It was maybe due to like only the portraits were hung in our family, in our grandmother's house. But there were lots of other interesting art that he had done, my uncle, where, it was like just being under some cupboard, in a cupboard and gathering dust, where it was not really displayed or hung in the walls of the house, our grandparents' house. But that's the time where I like looked into it, and I was like as a teenager, I was really interested in these pieces. And I used to even, in fact, question my grandmother, why are you not hanging this? And she never gave me an answer. But now I realize, because I think they were very conservative. They didn't want to hang nudity in their dining room, or, it was like messier thing like that, because there were some beautiful pieces of, males, females, and, it was like, it's some amazing art. And what was interesting is that art was done in like newspaper at that time. I haven't still seen an artist who has used, instead of canvas, newspaper was used as a medium for them to develop art. So it was like, that's where it all began for me, in my surrounding of being around an uncle who was an artist himself and an architect. So that interested me. And also I had a friend in school who was, my buddy, and she used to paint. Her name was Chamika De Alwis at that time, but now she's famously known as Leila, and she's an artist. And I remember using my pocket money to buy some of her pieces at that time. So it all began when I was really young. And on the investment side, it was a question of if you ask me, did I invest in art? I would say no. But at the same time, when I had a personal liking to an art, and when I started buying or collecting, there was a value at the back of my mind. I used to question myself, if the 43 group could grow in value in terms of the market value of these paintings of the 43 group was growing at that time when I started collecting. And then I realized, okay, the contemporary art pieces that I would buy now also would have a similar boom in the next 20 years. So there was an investment side thereafter, by having a passion of just growing up in art kind of world. But that investment side, me being an investment manager, realized the value that, like the 43 group, right, that this contemporary artists can do the rounds and get the value creation happen for me as an investor. So that's where I started buying art. And when I think I would have come many times to your gallery, and when I insist, there are 3 rules that I look at when I'm buying, right? One is I need that signature on the top, on the front face of the art. And I keep insisting, I think you have seen me, Saskia, that I keep insisting I want that signature. And also, if you see out of my collection, 95% of the art has been bought through a gallery, a reputed gallery. Because what I believe is, as an investment manager, right, I look at the downside, the risk of also buying art. If you buy fake art, or it's to establish the authenticity of it is greater, because of the reputation of the gallery that you buy from, right? Or at the exhibition, because the provenance has been created by the gallerist, right? So if you see, my collection would be 95% would be bought from an exhibition of a reputed gallery. And thirdly, I also look to see whether these artists have potential to go, or have they exhibited in a foreign in a foreign land in terms of exhibition. Have they had the opportunity of exhibiting overseas, and can they really top up to be an Asian artist in the next 20 years? You know, so when you're investing, I look to see what's the potential in 20 years. Can that value be created by that artist, right? So those are like 3 rules I look at. So of course, I know I might not be looking at the ideal thing of the painting being me falling in love with the painting, but I look at these kind of things because when I know the fact of when investing, you need to really harness your wealth or your value in a safe way. So that's what I do.
Thanks, Niloo. I know the style in which you collect, but it's also interesting how you pointed out this very beginning stage where you were observing your uncle's art and you had that courage to want to take. You shared with me how you took those pieces and actually hung them in your home, and that was really the beginning. And you were observing how people were engaging with those pieces. And something I observe in your collection, with all the sort of investment and understanding that you have gained in the market, but also the way in which you approach art, is with a very specific eye. And that's why I find your combination and style of collecting so very interesting. I'd like to come to you, Samaadhi, now. Speaking of this connection with art, and when I approached you to first be a part of this panel, you were sort of questioning why, and I would like to just sort of speak about that and in before I give my first question, because I think what's incredibly important in understanding what makes a collection is not just the size of the collection or the age of the collector, but it's also about, as I mentioned before, the characteristic in collecting and the understanding of what is your eye. And something I have observed, Samaadhi, now that I've had the pleasure of working with you for several years, was that you have from the very beginning a very clear idea of what you connected with when you were looking at contemporary art. Can you tell us a little bit about how it all began for you when you started looking at art, or when there was this exposure to art, and how it brought you towards looking at contemporary art as a collector?
So again, I think it started with my parents, and they did have art hanging in their home. But I don't think there was really a connection to it per se. It was more like they wanted to fill their walls with color. So there was this kind of idea of having a piece, but never really, there was no story behind it as such. So they were just, like I said, they sort of bought the pieces as more to fill their walls rather than anything else. But then when I came back, and I never really questioned it, you know, my dad would take me for exhibitions and things like that, but I never really had an interest when I was growing up. But then when I came back from uni and I was on holiday, I think in my last year of uni, my parents were building their new home, and they were just like, stop sitting around the house and help us with the house and kind of go and look for pieces for us and help out. So that's when, and they kind of pointed at like the places to kind of go and look at pieces. And I think that's one of the first times I met you, Saskia. And so from there onwards, again, for me, it started off as filling up a space, and I was looking at measurements rather than the actual piece. But the more and more I kind of started looking into it, like, first of all, I was shocked by the prices of the pieces. Like, I was asking my parents, like, seriously, is this really what's hanging on your walls? But it was, but then I started to question myself as to why this is what it is, and why they kept purchasing these pieces. And I have seen from a very young age, we have moved around a lot, and my parents' collection has grown, and they have gifted pieces, and there are pieces from the time that I was born to now, which have moved a few houses from home to home. So and I think the more and more I started to question, I think it started off with the price point, because I was like, why is something so expensive? And then I started to question it, and I think I started becoming more curious about it, I think. And then again, just helped them out with picking a few pieces, went back to uni, and then I came back to settle down here. And that's when I was actually thinking about starting my brand and things like that. And I think from there onwards, I started to look into like the history of design in Sri Lanka and like past designers and things like that. And then I think an aspect of art came in, like with the likes of Barbara Sansoni and designers like that. So I started again, it was a moment of like questioning and just being very inquisitive, and sort of started meeting you more and, asking more questions about pieces and visiting more exhibitions. Of course, for like the longest time, I didn't necessarily purchase anything. But it was more out of just curiosity. But then I started to actually respect the artist because of how long it took for them to build a collection and to exhibit, the thought process that goes into it, the story behind it. And slowly, step by step, like I started to have more respect, and I started to justify the value of it. And going back into the 43 group, to the 70s, to this whole, I think this, that sort of dynamic group, to everything, just kind of, it all just started to make more sense, So yeah, I think that's sort of how I came to, being more interested in not collecting, but owning a few pieces.
What was the first piece of art that you purchased?
So I can answer this in two ways. One is the first ever piece I bought was actually a print of Rajni Pereira's piece. It was actually from a charity auction I think you held a few years back. Again, I think no one bid for it because it was a print. But and I think I just got quite lucky there. And then an actual authentic original piece I bought was actually 2 years ago, because that was when I moved out of my parents' place and I moved in with my husband. And it was a Yuanta Yasas piece, and it was the exhibition was called A Love Story, and I think it was an emotional buy because I think I was going through the emotions of moving in with my partner and, the whole story of it all. So it was an emotional buy, and I mean, I still love it.
That's the painting behind you.
Yes.
Speaking of emotional connections with art, Lahiru, we get to follow a lot of your collection on social media. And there's no doubt that you are an avid supporter of the art industry, but you also have, a career that has been very rooted in IT. So how did this happen? How did you get introduced to art, and how did that bring you to the space you're sitting in now, where you're surrounded by so much contemporary work?
Thanks, Saskia, for having me. Good evening, everybody. Thanks for the question. So bear with me. I mean, it's a bit cliche, but I mean, end of the day, my parents definitely had some sort of impact in terms of collecting. My father, while I came from a very middle-income family, my father, while he was making inroads, used to collect antiques. So I can remember that journey with him, going to these antique shops to collect and so on and so forth. And I did have artistic streak. My parents noticed that, went to art school. I was very fortunate enough, and I fundamentally believe this. So while I collect pieces of art, it's also thought processes which I feel I collect, or collect pieces which capture a movement or a time. So one of the more fortunate things which has happened in my life is, I've met people who have broadened my understanding. So for instance, before I left, ever stepped foot in a plane, my art teacher, he used to live in Italy, and he explained to me about Impressionism, cooked prawns in a Western way. I've always said curries. So, it was this mind-blown incident. So it kind of, you kind of added on to it. So I think that was somewhat my journey. And I think I can, people like Anjalendran has come into my life. Again, their philosophy, Dominic Sansoni, Lucky Senanayaka, all of these guys actually really helped me understand how they think. And I kind of essentially try to then capture that. And whenever I'm collecting, I'll look at something like that. My ex-wife had a huge impact on how I collect. She's Icelandic. So from a cultural perspective also, I was taken into this, what you would call alien lands. First time I saw an abstract expressionist piece, I was like, what is this piece of shit on a wall? And then, you have an impact. You look at it and you're like, what? And then essentially, you come to terms with it, and then, you grow with it. So yeah, my absolute love, is collecting contemporary pieces. I really love it. I think Chamika also mentioned this. I love this relationship with, gallerists, artists, hanging out with them a lot. I can remember moments. I can remember the first time I met you at your gallery. These seminal moments, essentially, which kind of, you grow with people, right? Like, so, we grow together. And I think that's essentially what, in terms of a collection or collecting, I do. And one part of my collecting and collections is I also tend to get rid of pieces as well once in a while. If I go bored of it, I don't hang on to it. If I can monetize it, I'll monetize it and buy something else which I find more interesting. And I think, as many pieces as I have, I probably got rid of 20% of that, one way or the other. So I think that's the kind of journey, in a nutshell. I might rush through most of it, but in a nutshell, that is what I have. And I would like to say at this point, the wall space and what we collect on a wall is a percentile of what you buy into in terms of what we all do. So it's very much that journey that your life is so much richer for it, right? My life is so much richer for it. And I think that's what I go after, that those highs and lows of, having a piece on your wall. So.
Thanks, Lahiru. I really love from all these talks that we've been doing, the sort of the parallels or the connections that arise from these conversations that while we've curated the panels, as I mentioned, because of your individual profiles, I find there are so many cross sections, whether it's Anjalendran, who has been this massive influence on young collectors and continues to be, or the relationship with the emotional relationship with collecting, the idea of investing in art, etc. So it's so interesting how each one of you has very, very individual characteristics and relationships with art, but also there are so many commonalities. Coming back to you, Chamika, we spoke about the beginning and how your collection has grown, but can you tell us a little bit more how your collecting influences you as an architect? And also, do you feel a responsibility to introduce your clients to the art world?
Well, I think art is something, I'm a strong believer that art is actually something which is important in anybody's life. Let it be art, music, theater, all of that. And that inculcates a very different perception as to how you see the world. and how we appreciate other things. And saying that architecture and art together is one of those marriages that almost exists with each other being there. And I can't see, and I have not been in many spaces where art has been not there and calling it a fantastic piece of architecture or otherwise. And the greatest, I think, examples that we can have in Sri Lanka is the work of Jeffrey Bawa. And if you look at all of his work, and most of it is basically fantastic collaborations with fantastic people, artists and friends from Ina De Silva, Barbara Sansoni, Lucky Senanayaka, it could be Ismat Rahim. So all of these people, in fact, help in merging and weaving this one thread that takes the whole articulation of space, architecture, and all of that to work. So taking into consideration all of those examples, I think for me, clients with my practice, it's mostly of twofold. One is basic, the residential component of it, and also you get the leisure and the more private sector component, where if you look at the private sector and if you look at the leisure component, which are mostly hotels and that segment, convincing somebody as a person, an individual, regardless of the fact that they're collectors or not, or they appreciate, could be easy. But I think the challenge is when it comes to the corporates. You have the identity of one person, but then you have to also sometimes justify it to a board of directors, for example, if you're looking at a bigger project, and saying, yes, out of a budget of a hotel, you have another component which is almost equivalent to, sometimes equivalent to the cost of the project or half of it. And then you get a board of directors saying, okay, we really need this. But I think it's important, and I think from your perspective of what you have done, the patrons of Sri Lankan art have made that possible for us. And us as designers, I think I have the great fortune of working with Channa on many of these projects and having that conversations with, let it be chairmans, let it be board of directors, to say that, yes, it's important to have art in a space, a public space. I think it's something very important. And these people, for example, people like Ajit, Krishan, Abbas, all of them in the corporate world who have had relationships with me and the work that we have done, have actually we've been able to bring that into the public realm, and having fantastic artists also being a part of it and exposed to them, I think becomes easier when you try to also put that story forward to the corporate. Then you do have the other end of it, which is the residences, which becomes, I think, very private in a way, because it is your home. If you look at a hotel, if you look at a public space, it's there. It can be critiqued in a subjective way. Everybody has their opinion. But when it's a home, when it's a house, it's very personal. And as I think what Niloo was talking about earlier, I kind of get that all the time, where sometimes there's a kind of clean line of art which is not in the public viewing, and then that gets thrown back into maybe a bedroom. But although it would have been fantastic to have it in your living room, so there are those challenges. And you actually have clients who come maybe of, I think, categorize it as 4 types, where you have one being the type who comes and are shocked to see that you actually live with art, and they get kind of taken aback when you think that, okay, will they actually want, or will I want them to also have this kind of space, and have no intentions of buying or have bought art. But sometimes you get a pleasant surprise of them kind of ending up after the 18 months or 14 months or 20 months of being around you. And I'm fortunate enough to be able to, I think, be a part of that once or twice. So lucky with it. Of them, in fact, appreciating art. And that for me was a great opportunity and something to kind of look back and say, yes, I really changed their perception from starting to say that, okay, why is this on the wall and why are there so many pieces, or why is there art? And I think what Samaadhi was saying in terms of, I think, the cost of art for a person who's starting a collection, it can be shocking. And to say, are we actually going to spend this much? And to get somebody as an architect or a designer to say that, look, you guys, buy this piece, it will be there. And educating them, I think is a much more of a space. And also in terms of how, when you're designing it, for me, is that do do you leave room for art? And I think that's kind of important for me to, I always, I mean, with my experience and being around a lot of other designers, art plays a huge part in any space. So there's that immense encouragement that you kind of portray in terms of and bring forward to the clients and try and say, look, this space will be a very different space, and it does make that change when they actually see it at the end. Then obviously you have the jackpot where you have collectors who are clients, and that's a tremendous joy to work with, where in fact you have this vast collection of fantastic pieces, and you're given the opportunity of curating it within the space. And then if everything fails, you have the fourth category, which I call the Anjalendran technique of persuading your client to buy maybe 5 pieces of antiques and 15 pieces of art prior to even designing the project, and getting them to, I think Lahiru can relate to this quite well, with friends. And then that's I think also a fantastic way, which I have not been able to do, but I think Anjalan can do that. But that's also a way where you kind of educate and you kind of bring a different perception so that they kind of understand why art is important, why the build fabric of an antique is important. And you've not even realized what house you're going to, in fact, have it in, or how you're going to occupy that space. But you've got into that. And I think music, all of that kind of plays a huge part in that. So art is, I think the visual art is one component, but there's so many other things that make the broader picture work with clients. And it can be easy, sometimes it's not.
Do you feel like it's people are more open to investment in art now, that it's changed more recently, or?
Very much, in fact. And I think also what you guys also are doing in terms of the galleries, all of that. And I think great tribute to you all, where in fact, young artists who are, recently, if you look at Nirmal Vasan's exhibitions, all of what you all have done, all of that. I mean, it's kind of a lot of people are approaching. I have met a lot of people who, in fact, had no inclination of buying, have thought, yes, it's a beautiful piece, and it kind of, I think it's also the story where they have developed. You see a lot of people collecting, and also with social media, I think what's changing is that these collections are being exposed. People see it, and they know how actually people live amongst these pieces. And the tremendous pleasure that you have something beautiful in your house kind of matters, or in whatever space it is, could be a room, it could be anything. And art does make a huge difference. And a lot of people I have kind of met, regardless of clients, that it be even friends, who have kind of got into buying art simply because it's out there, people can see it, and they know how people live around it. I think that's kind of important as well.
Thanks, Chamika. I think it's so incredibly interesting to understand how as a collector, you are also so much an influencer, and how that relates with your work as architect. And it's very connected, but also challenging at the same time. But coming as somebody who's so involved in the art industry, I think all these roles played are so much a part of the industry's growth, and so very important. Speaking of the industry's growth, Niloo, what are your observations in terms of how you have seen the market appreciate over the last decade specifically? And from also a critical point of view, what are the things that you would like to see change as a collector?
Past, I would say from like the 1990s, art has grown tremendously in terms of value in some of the artists like Jagat Ravindra to Anoma Vijayawardena to Lucky Senanayaka. Those kind of artists that are the more contemporary artists after the 43 group, if you have invested and held on to those pieces, you're talking about having like 300% growth in terms of some of the prices that I would have paid. Well, what I paid for Jagat Ravindra in the 1990s, and now when you cost, I like, oh my gosh, I like Jesus, did I pay? I'm not going to pay this. But it's nice to know, but that's the whole idea of being a collector. And you need to get in and identify those artists at the correct time. It's like buying a stock, right? I mean, the whole idea of being a good investment manager is to identify those artists who are going to grow in value in whatever sense, right? Maybe through your talent, or marketability, your international acceptance. All those factors come and put a value to some of the art that is done, right? So I have seen a tremendous growth in some of the artists. And these artists also have grown in terms of their style. So it does not mean that just because you own a particular artist you bought in the 1990s, that it's all over. The artist can evolve and the style differs. So always as a collector, I would like to have different periods of the artist also. So I don't just stop at buying a particular artist, but if the artist evolves in terms of style or what they're doing, I like to have different pieces from those collections, because it's all about building that gap, or building the building block of that artist as well, right? So I would see, especially like Mohandas Carter, to all these great contemporary artists have changed tremendously in terms of what they were doing 20 years ago and what they are doing now. So it's a story that you build. Each chapter for all these artists is a chapter that they create for themselves. From the investment side, I always tell people, and I'm happy that Chamika and his clients recognize that art is a store of value, and and everybody should be having art in their investment portfolio. Because as an investment manager, we would always tell, and if you see in the global front, right, all investments, you have a diversified portfolio where you would have equity, you have fixed income securities, you will have real estate, and art is a very much component of that diversified portfolio that you create for yourself in terms of value creation and wealth creation for that individual or a corporate. So it's nice to know that people are doing it, because if you see on the international side, we see some of the artists like in the 1950s, now they're going at X number of times the price, and it's going to happen. It's going to happen for our Sri Lankan artists as well. It's a question of, do you believe in it? And are you going to get the timing right to do it as a collector?
And you spoke also about some of the observations that you felt, some of the things that you felt needed to change in realizing the resale value of art. Can you speak a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so I think for me as a collector, I think one of the things that we really need in Sri Lanka, in our art world, is that we need the art valuers and the art appraisers to come in. This is where, authenticity of the art, the valuer can assess the value. And as, let's say, a collector, like I was so happy to hear what Lahiru said, that he has sold 20% of his collection. At least he has churned his art collection over. Because when I did once a talk with Shant Fernando, and he said, my collection is not for sale. But I told him, no, my collection, everything is for sale, including me at a price, right? So it's nice to know that Lahiru, who is a young collector, who has already, right, turned his art collection, 20% of his art collection. So for people like that, for this industry to grow, it's good to have where we have art valuers who we can go to, value our contemporary art, establish the price, because these art valuers will take into account different aspects. What is the global contemporary art prices going at? what is Indian art going at? That's the relative in the subcontinent. If you see some of the Bangladeshi artists to the Indian artists, oh my God, exponential growth in the prices that you're talking about, right? So you always, the art valuers or as an investor, you would look at what is the value creation on the international side. Are these artists, Asian artists, commanding huge prices? Then in terms of is the artist international? Is he or she an international accepted artist? Then your valuer would put a huge price for it. And also, I always keep asking how many pieces of the artist is for sale in an exhibition. Because if he has about 100 pieces, the value is not going to enhance, right? This is me, investing. It's not going to enhance like if you're going to have like a poster concept. So is it a very select kind of number of art pieces that he or she has done, and those kind of things come into the valuers. So it's very important for the art industry to have these art valuers, and I'm sure galleries like you all would be able to enhance and do this kind of, and bring in the valuers into your galleries and enable the collectors to come and value their art. And secondly, I think what is most important is that you create a marketplace for the collectors, not only through the having exhibitions where the artists come and sell their artwork, but if the collectors, on the other hand, like Lahiru, wants to sell his certain pieces of his art, you should make that the buyer-seller to match. And that is very much needed so that, marketability of art, where you don't just become a custodian of art, where in the olden days in history, you would see the families commission the artists to do the work, the artwork, and then they passed it on from generation to generation. But like what Lahiru just told me, I'm so happy what he said. He has already sold 20%. So this is the kind of marketplace that we need to establish, so that not only the artist who comes and sells, the collectors themselves would want to come in. And that's where you need to match that. So for the industry to become vibrant and more people need to get in and want to, also, it's not only about the painting being on a wall and you admire it every day. People like me say, okay, this value, do I now enhance my value and really monetize and realize the gain that I have taken, I have got because of my ability to pick the right artist? It's like buying stocks. At a point after your holding period, you would want to sell and realize that. So that's the difference between maybe Shant and myself. I would want to sell some.
I think it's interesting because there are perhaps two types of collectors, and then there's the 100% emotional collector who wants to hold on to their pieces, and then there is the investment oriented collector, or potentially it's not necessarily even that. Maybe Lahiru would agree, and we'll come to that. But I think there is definitely this growing interest in selling works, and I've experienced that as a gallerist, particularly with people who are moving to another country and can't take all their works with them, the next generation, etc. So this is something that's definitely growing. So it's a really interesting observation, Niloo, and definitely something that we need to improve upon in the industry. You spoke about posters. And I think that's a really interesting subject because it came up when I was preparing for this conversation with Samaadhi. And I don't agree necessarily 100% in the value. When it's a limited edition, it can appreciate in value, but of course much lower. So you're correct in saying that the difference in a unique piece of art, it's considerably different in how it appreciates. Samaadhi, you spoke about did you share with us the first piece that you purchased, the Rajni Pereira print? You did mention it at the beginning. But also we spoke about the observations that your generation, people you move with of your age group, the observations they make of your collection and the interaction that they have. And this was something I was very interested in learning because of you being a younger collector. Can you share a little bit about that with us? And also a second thing I would like to ask you would be, how has, similarly to the question I asked Chamika, how has art influenced your work as a designer? So if we could start perhaps with looking at this sort of generational outlook that you have observed.
I think on a generational outlook, so with, for example, if we're gonna look at my friends in general, and when they, for example, when they come over and they see certain pieces, they tend to, I think they're also very curious to know what this piece is about. I think it's almost like a party trick for me, because they look at a piece and they're like, what is this? And it's gone to a point where I have this one piece from Fabian, and I'm not even kidding. Like, I've had people just go up to it and crowd around it. And they're like, is this, like, is that, what is this, And it's so great, like, to the point where I've even had messages the next day where they've like texted me being like, but tell me, what is it? So, and I think that is sort of like a great way to start a conversation. And then because of that, I think they know that I'm interested in collecting pieces. And then ever since then, I think when you started, I think this is where I think it was Chamika who brought up about social media. I think a lot of my friends have sort of gotten more into art because of, for example, them following your gallery or other accounts. And in general, your initiative on supporting local artists, the foundation, they have even asked me, like, is it worth spending X amount on, these posters that you're selling, And I have been like, yes, do it, because that's sort of your in to picking a piece and then remembering, for example, what we're going through right now this year with everything that's going on with COVID, and trying to support artists and the local industry in general, to having a piece and then being like, this was the piece that kind of got me into it, So I guess that comes back to me buying my first Rajni print and then holding on to it with dear life. And then later, a few years later, actually buying an authentic piece. It's the story and the appreciation of it with time, and working on owning your first piece and to be proud of it as well, I think. And I think a lot of my friends and people my age are more and more interested in getting to know, I think, the value of an art piece with time. But again, it all comes down to, I think, the story and the price point and how they go about it, I think. But they're definitely very curious and wanting to know more. And coming, I think, your next question with how it sort of helps my design process. So I sort of, again, it was curiosity and having many conversations with you, Saskia, I think, and all the exhibitions I've been to when I was starting my brand. I think I've went into all of, like, my work is known to have a lot of color blocking and different contrasting colors and things like that, which I have to thank Ruan Prasanna for it. And then I have my very slinky pieces going, which I think I have to thank Nuan Nalaka for his very sort of, how do I explain his work? Like, it's very
delicate
and intricate, yeah. And sort of mystical, and, it's sort of like you're walking sometimes into a garden, into the Garden of Eve, So, so I think, and then of course my collaboration with Movindu Binoy, I think that was my first proper interaction with an artist, a local artist. And again, Movindu is closer to my age. And it just like his work really spoke to me because it was more of a direct link to everything, because his work is mixed media and it's a good balance of history and politics and social media and pop culture and everything mixed together. So it kind of, it really interested me to like talk to him and see why his pieces were such and where his inspiration comes from. So I think that was sort of my way of again, it came down to my curiosity of how all these artists came up with like all of these different mediums and how their pieces came about. So yeah.
I think your journey, even though you're somewhat at the beginning, without wanting to sound patronizing in any way, but I think you have a taste for very provocative art, even though you would maybe not admit to that, and truly, and I think the influence that it's had on you as a designer and that interconnection that can happen with all collectors, I believe. It's very difficult to keep any other world apart, and how that influences and how that grows with you as you mature as a collector is such an interesting part of being a collector, and such an interesting thing for me to learn about the collectors that I work with. Lahiru, coming back to you, Niloo was thrilled with your approach to collecting. And we had a really lovely conversation prior to this talk about how you've really moved 100% into the contemporary and how your relationship with art has evolved. You also you are very much involved in other projects. So I think also really kind of developing your work as an art patron in many senses. Can you tell us about these projects? And can you also tell us about some observations that you have made of the industry, having been so immersed and involved in everything for quite some time now?
Sure, thanks, Asya. I'll start with the last question and kind of progress towards the projects which I'm involved in. In terms of the wider views on this, right? And I'm also echoing out sometimes what artists would tell me because of some relationships I have with them, within reason. So one of the things, obviously, is the idea, and this is, maybe I was also subject to this kind of thought process at some point or the other. We buy artists' work in terms of contemporary, and we're kind of helping them out, especially if the artist is young and not, let's say, very well defined or established. And to kind of think through this process and think nobody's helping anybody out. If anything, we are helping each other out. Because when you buy a piece of art or you buy a book to read, you are immersing yourself as much as anything else. You're growing as a part of that. So it's very fundamentally important to come together with that reality. Nobody's doing each other favors particularly, but you're growing together, you're gaining something as much as they're gaining maybe from 1%. So that's one part of it. And the other thing is, I feel, and one of the main components, I think, as a group, which we've done, or I've been very fortunate enough to do, some of these artists and individuals in my life, like Dominic, Anjalendra, and all of these guys, if I don't mention any names, I'm very sorry. But they've been in the game for a long time. And some of us, have been essentially getting into this very early on. Like, I mean, just to mention one name, Ajanta. When he as an architect came to my house and we started doodling or talking about something. So that's one element of it. So sometimes, the part of the journey is that. So for instance, I suppose, and I mentioned this very clearly, the story to you as well. I mean, though I don't think we've known each other that very well, the fact that I walked into your gallery, in somewhat your early days, those things also kind of define that journey, and, you learn from it as you go along. In terms of more I'm really trying to push myself. So one of the other the reason I'm into contemporary is I'm always trying to kind of essentially see, what would engage me more. So for instance, I've been trying to you can minimalist art, in Sri Lanka as well as elsewhere, because you can now have access to people who are outside Sri Lanka, especially I think in Pakistan, there's a really great scene, India, and so on and so forth. So that I've been kind of doing as well, stretching the envelope a little bit. And that's sometimes when I have to sell art. Like I was very fortunate enough to get a collection of 3 pieces from this Jatoi, Ayesha Jatoi out of Pakistan. And I was like, oh, I have to have them. So I had to like sell stuff. So I was like, what am I going to sell to kind of pay for this? So that happened. And lastly, I want to tell about the projects which I've been fortunate enough just by life chance. So one of the things which we are doing right now during my last life at People's Bank, I was, the people who I'm kind of leasing my home from in the 70s were responsible for commissioning all these beautiful masterpieces by large, artists, George Keats, Senaka Senanayake, Richard Gabriel, and so on and so forth. So when I went in as a board member, I was like, okay, let's, try to catalog these, let's bring them out from where they are, and had the great privilege of working on the large George Keats through 2 GMs. And now we are in the process of essentially cataloging it. I'm speaking to actually Ismat on it. The current GM is like really pushing for it. So this will be kind of saved for future generations. And, to me, I take immense pride in that. The other kind of project which I'm involved in, and I thank you for giving a chance to kind of speak about it. One of my very close friends, Mohanat's wife, who's also very close, Maria, a 2-time cancer survivor. And, she had that treatment in Sri Lanka. So she wanted to give back to the Sri Lankan, community and so on and so forth. So she wanted to actually start a foundation in order to kind of aid patients. So we ended up, or she ended up actually driving this whole process. I'm involved in the technology part in terms of e-commerce and so on and so forth. So we are building a website, not only for the art pieces which are going to come to Sri Lanka and has come in, and there'll be, I think, 2 exhibitions, and I'm thrilled to be somewhat tangentially part of it, and also to raise money for it. So I think it's a part of this kind of lifestyle I like to be in, and that's how it has helped me. And even this conversation, meeting you all, I mean, this is all a part of, I think, collecting and being in that group of people. So that's in a nutshell what I'm kind of doing now.
Thanks, Lahiru, for sharing all of that. It's really wonderful to learn how collecting has also taken you into these other worlds of building on and bringing awareness into different spaces, like the People's Bank Project. Those works look particularly interesting. I had no idea about them until you posted about the project on your Instagram. One observation you also made about the scene was that you felt that artists needed to be given more credit for their agency, that they needed to be appreciated for what they were doing as a career. And that is something that is not necessarily given the correct accreditation or appreciation from our audience. Could you share a little bit about your thoughts on that?
So essentially, I feel, and this is a very, I might change my mind at some point or the other, right? So, and essentially, so the whole process, I felt in terms of, and it's a discussion which we fundamentally have, and I've also had in terms of these movements and so on and so forth. So one of the things Anjalendran used to say, he's like, we have to essentially buy contemporary because, you have to kind of put, they're living artists, right? So that's one element of it. But I think even in a society, and I think this is, I've kind of seen for myself in my lifetime with my family and so on and so forth. The moment like the kind of incomes and everything else rises, you have this kind of space to buy art, appreciate art, because you realize that it actually has a significant impact in improving your life. Why is it that I do what we do, or all of these collectors do what we do? So I think to simplify the thing, so we have to kind of treasure the fact that the individuals who put art in our lives as the creators of it have this incredible ability to uplift our life. And it's important to see them as equals in that journey. I think that's fundamentally important to do, and not kind of some kind of charitable work which you may or may not be doing. that's something else. That's doing charity. That don't confuse that into kind of collecting, I think. And that's something I strongly believe in. And that's why I think Samaadhi, this comes into the conversation which you kind of alluded to as well. Why do we value a piece at that point? Sure, a gallery might say, it's worth this much, but blah, blah, blah. But end of the day, we make a conscious effort and say, this is valuable to me because of this, right? So I think that's essentially it. I think that's my point. And I think if we do that, we'll have more honest conversations about art, and we can critique art. And, because we can say, what, that's a good piece and that's a pretty shit piece, and, people sometimes don't do that either, right? Because after a certain point, you never want to tiptoe on what you call an established artist. But, you will be happily, merrily walking around and saying stuff like to new artists, this doesn't quite fit my whatever, so I think that comes out of that. So I think once we reach that, level of maturity, we can essentially have that honest conversation. And I think that's required in a mature sense of collecting. And I think, Niloo, this goes to what you say. The moment we start actually critiquing artists, seeing that these guys are equals, then the game gets better. You know what I mean? Because they'll be like, look, these guys actually see me for who I am. Plus, they have the ability to give an honest opinion about my work, right? So, and then I think you'll have that ecosystem develop. So in a nutshell, I think that's essentially my thoughts on it.
I think it's an incredibly important observation, and it's what I truly hope will be that will come more out of conversations like this, as you mentioned. But it's something that came up similarly in the curators' conversation and the issues in our society, the classism that exists, and how that changes our approach to the industry. And I think the fact that we're having these conversations in itself means that there is change happening. And I see that, I observe that in the way that people are interacting, but I also observe the opposite and feel very strongly in agreement with you, Lahiru, that needs to change, that artists need to be appreciated for their portfolios and their work, and what the established artists have achieved in our industry is so phenomenal, and the emerging artists as well. So thank you for bringing that up. I want to move on to some questions because we have quite a few, and it would be great to give everybody the opportunity to engage with you. Victoria Walker is online and she's commenting and saying, really interesting discussion, thanks. Would like to hear a bit more about panelists' relationship with artists. Do you see yourselves as patrons? Lahiru, perhaps you want to answer that? I had it assigned to you because Victoria was kind enough to share this question before. You're on mute.
Yeah, yes, I don't see myself as a patron. I see myself as a what I would call an art lover. It's a more fluid term in terms of it gives me the freedom to have this level of kind of conversation or express myself more fully. I think art lover also allows me to have that kind of fluidity. So thanks, Victoria, for the question. I feel like I'm an art lover, and I think that's where I would like to be at.
We have a question from Ranjika Aryaratna, and he's asking about mass collection and your views on it. How some collectors sometimes stack up, in his words, stack up hundreds of valuable art pieces in storage where no one really gets to enjoy them. Chamika, would you like to give your opinion on that one?
Well, I think everybody has a collection which is not on walls, and some of them are in either portfolios or stacked up, as he says. But I think that stacking up is also a process of appreciating it. I'm sure all of us sometimes go back to these pieces, look at it, appreciate it ourselves. It doesn't mean it's just stacked up to collect dust, but I think it's to do with the whole process of collecting. And is it collecting in the bulk or is it actually all pieces which actually make sense, and it's a collection of so I actually feel that, yeah, it's kind of important also to do that in a way, depending on your parameters of how you collect it, and it's your own, I think, appreciation towards that.
Saskia, can I just add something?
I want to ask if you have some work stacked up in a room somewhere. That's a very diplomatic answer that I might spare you.
Saskia, to add to what Chamika just said, I mean, as the art as an investment, right? You will not be able to hang every piece in your home or your office or wherever, right? But if you take art as an investment asset class, there's no harm in stacking up. If you think some artist is going to do really well and you're taking that call for 10 years, and I would be doing that if I had the capacity to hold the artist and keep for a while, because that would be a wise investor. Because if you see in history, that's what some of the some of the great works have been held by a few collectors. So yeah, why not?
I think this is a nice one for everyone to answer. Question for all the panelists. Name a Sri Lankan artist who you don't currently own, but is on your wish list. Samaadhi, you want to go first?
I would say Jagat Ravindra. I think Jagat Ravindra.
Niloo?
I would go with Chandragupta Tenuvara.
Lahiru?
Well, I'm going to say again a lovely cliche answer. You know, as much as I love collecting contemporary, I would love to have a good any George Keat at this point. But I feel like I don't. I don't have it. So I'm saving rupees and cents. But the appreciation value on that is just skyrocketing. So every morning you get up, it's a little bit further from your reach.
Chamika?
Well, I probably H.A. Karunaratne. That's someone I actually don't have, and I kind of, as you know, I mean, it takes a long time for me to get into buying pieces, but that's something I've been really, like to get one.
As Nuwan Henaka is asking, as collectors, what is your view on NFTs? Has anybody started collecting digital art pieces as NFTs? Does anyone understand what an NFT is?
I understand NFTs quite a bit, but the thing is with NFTs. So here's the thing: NFTs is like any other medium, right? But you have to understand what you're buying. So I think there's a lot of hype about general NFTs, and it's easy to get carried away with that kind of and then invest money or put money onto it, which you don't have to. And NFTs are primarily an investment mechanism, because the whole idea is you can have that art if you want to, right? Like it's easily downloadable, so you can enjoy it. It's an investment mechanism based on blockchain. So just do your investigations thoroughly before kind of engaging on it, is what I would have to say.
I find it interesting how this NFT conversation is coming a lot into the artist industry, but personally as a gallerist, I feel like it couldn't be further away from what we're talking about here, which is really this kind of relationship with maybe not from investing, but this relationship with art. And that goes back as far as it goes with everybody here, and how it's inevitably an emotional connection. So it's an interesting one. Tehani Ari is asking about thoughts on investing in supporting public and street art.
Can I have a crack at that? Because
yeah.
I started buying street art as I mentioned this story to you, and it is one of the most, and for a long time even now, there is incredible gems there. So essentially, and I feel uncomfortable even putting it on the street art, but we'll say art which is available on the street, right? So not street art, but art which is available on the street. If you have an eye for collecting, you can find gems anywhere. Not collecting art, collecting anything really. But what you have to remember is the person who kind of is selling that piece on the street probably puts the same level of thought process and so on and so forth for creating art. And I would also like to reiterate the fact that, thinking about my own life and my accomplishments, that's basically also based on luck. So when you look at an art piece, even on the street, and what they're trying to portray, contextualize in that scenario play, and I think that's a good thing. And there's been many artists who have, maybe not so much in Sri Lanka, which comes to my mind, but Basquiat or people did American post-impressionist movement. Nobody put any value on that art, essentially, and that was what you would call art which you found on the street, but then found incredible, latter in their life, and because the American economy was booming, things just picked up. So I'm sorry for taking a little bit more time on that, but I think that should be the approach of people.
But just to add to that, I think street art, not necessarily that it's like you buy art on the street, but street art in overseas context also creates opportunity for some of these artists to have visibility in terms of creating it on a wall, or in some in like Amsterdam and all certain countries, they have street art is very popular. And that's the way of expressing. And art is beautiful in any sense, so I think, I would support street art in terms of a corporate to support for these young artists to come out and express their whatever they feel inside and whatever their creativity to blossom. As a corporate, I think that's a cool way to support these guys to just come and get visibility.
I think it's really the corporate sector that does need to support public and street art. It's really an area that falls into that sector. But I think we are starting to see some really positive changes in that regard. Sol is asking, can you please share some promising young artists' names that in your view will make a name in the broader Asian region? Samaadhi?
I think Movindu, Binoy, Shiri Raman, I think those two are so far, they've definitely caught my eye. Yeah. For young artists.
Anyone else?
I think Nirmal Vasan comes to mind. I think Chamika already spoke about him. I'm a big fan of his work. Ajanta, who is kind of exhibiting now, I think he's a really lovely find. And Pushpakanta, and all of these are, essentially, if you even, and to the wider question, if you go to somebody like the Saskia Fernandez Gallery, and then you have that kind of conversation with them, I think there is enough kind of upcoming artists where you can have a conversation and then kind of say, these are the artists which I would like to follow. Those are names. Those guys I put. Nirmal Vasan I have collected quite a bit because I really, really love his work.
So the last question from Asita: with the emergence of the market, art collectors should be an anchor or play an anchor role to facilitate and add fluidity to the market, further demanding the tools such as art insurance, lending against the arts from the financial market, and a governing body for authentication and valuation purposes from the state to tackle the fakes market. What are your thoughts on this?
I think that's what I in my talk before, I addressed this. For the market to develop, you need the valuers to come in, right? And they are the ones who will establish the authenticity of the piece, because there are a lot of fake pieces that are moving around. And that's one of the reasons that the 43 group has, some of the artists have not been really able to harness in terms of a global sense, because of the fake pieces that are going around. So you really need to differentiate from the fake and the real stuff. So for that is what is needed in terms of valuers and the galleries to come and say these are genuine pieces. So that's important. That's very important for any industry to develop. I don't think art market can be regulated like the Colombo Stock Exchange or something, because it's a very much a different kind of asset. So you need to do it in a more subtle, discreet way of how you establish the values, how you establish the authenticity of it, etc. So, but you have to be cautious. And I always tell even new collectors when they ask me, I say, you really need to be cautious on the money you're spending. Are you throwing good money into the value, what you're seeing? Those kind of things you need to be cautious of, not because there is some name on a painting.
Thanks, Niloo. I think with art insurance as well, we have a long way to go. I think the standards on which our insurance companies work in sort of valuing art collections needs a lot of work. So these are definitely areas that need more involvement. And hopefully, as I mentioned before, these conversations will be the beginning of initiatives and so many more ideas for what we can do. This brings us to the end of the conversation. I want to thank you, the panelists, for being a part of this. It's truly an honor to have you on the panel today, and thank you for so openly sharing your experiences as collectors and your observations of the industry. Thank you everyone for attending the talk and engaging with our panelists today. We will make this talk available online via our channel, and we'll be sending it out to you as well. So this series will be continuing, so we have a lot more to share with you. So do stay in touch, and we're very pleased to be working with Nations Trust Bank Private Banking on this initiative. Thank you, everyone. Stay safe and stay well.
Thank you.
Bye. Good night.
Good night.
Nations Trust Bank Private Banking is the epitome of elite banking. With its exclusive privileges devoted to providing just the right balance between financial success and lifestyle, our private banking members richly deserve. A financial solution dedicated to excellence, with an unparalleled array of products and services that enrich, enhance, and empower success. A financial solution focused on wealth creation, lifestyle, and the establishment of legacy. A legacy of priority, a legacy of abundance, a legacy much desired. Creating a legacy that's timeless.